How can the cute little hedgehog save the planet? Well, according to ecologist, author and hedgehog lover Hugh Warwick and the Beatles, all we need is love. We just need to fall in love with this little creature, and that love will fire us up to protect not just this tiny animal, but also the planet. In this episode of the MetroWild podcast, Hugh is our love guru. He tells us all about his great paramour, the humble hedgehog, and how we can successfully date and build a long-term romance with all things hedgehog. Hugh Warwick is an ecologist and author. He's also the spokesperson for the British Hedgehog Preservation Society and the creator of the Hedgehog Highways petition. His books include A Prickly Affair, Beauty in the Beast, and Linescapes. He has been on the BBC countless times and written for the BBC Wildlife magazine, The Guardian, and Countryfile magazine. Hugh Warwick, I'm super chuffed that you're going to be you are my first guest. Now, you're known as Hedgehog Hugh, and you're passionate about these cute little animals. You've even said that hedgehogs are the most important creatures on the planet. Now, how can this be? Can you tell us more?
Okay, so straight in with the big question. It begins, I suppose, almost as a bit of a joke, because there's one thing about hedgehogs, which is that they look cute. And they look particularly unlikely to be at the basis of any great revolutionary change. But every time there's a vote or a poll about the nation's nature icon, favorite wild animal, whatever, the hedgehog always wins. And there's an late American writer, Stephen Jay Gould, and he said, "We will not fight to save what we do not love." He was very much talking about conservation. And you know that instinctively. You know that liking is only half-hearted. I do find social media a little bit worrying that it's so heavily weighted towards liking. I would rather people to be fully engrossed in love, because with love comes change. But obviously we tend to resist love. People worry that they'll be thought of as stupid. People worry that people will look down on them for being so sort of soft with their language. But love is hard. And quite particularly with regards to the natural world, if you accept that this relationship you have with nature is one which is based within the concept of love, you are accepting the pain of grief as it is destroyed before your very eyes. But anyway, we will not fight to save what we do not love. And all of the wildlife conservation groups, they understand that instinctively and have used images of nature forever to try and get us to fall in love with nature. The elephants and the tigers, the whales and the dolphins, the charismatic megafauna. It's how David Attenborough has worked forever, was using beautiful, beautiful, big imagery to try and get us to fall in love with nature. But it dawned on me that it's a bit like relying on images of supermodels, actors, actresses, or whatever, to formulate your idea of human relationships. I mean, in the end, if we're lucky enough, we'll fall in love with the girl or the boy next door, not with some unobtainable supermodel. I mean, I'm as likely to get nose to nose with a humpback whale as I am with Angelina Jolie. These things just aren't going to happen. Well, actually, I think she's a lot taller than me as well. But in the end, it's the girl or the boy next door, and the hedgehog is the animal equivalent. There's nothing magic about the hedgehog, but it's just they have no fight or flight response. So when you see a hedgehog, the first thing it does is it frowns. The prickles come up over its eyes, its nose, and its ears, and then it might roll into a ball. And if you lie down on the grass beside it or in the road, as I have done many times, and wait, it will unroll. And there will be a brief moment when you end up nose to nose with this staggeringly amazing creature. And because it doesn't have a fight or flight response, it's not going to bite you. It's not going to run away. It will stop. It will look. And in that moment, there is a sort of, it can be seconds, it can be minutes of eye contact with another sentient animal, a fantastically brilliant predator, bigger than 99% of all animals that have ever lived on the planet. It's in the top 1% with the blue whale, Tyrannosaurus Rex, and us. This brilliant predator, where you can be nose to nose with it, you get that sense of being seen, you get that sense of sentience, And you get that potential moment of slipping across that line from liking nature to actually falling in love. And that's why the hedgehog is so important, because it's a gateway species. It's one you've actually got an opportunity of getting close to. And that is where we end up falling in love with nature.
That is such a beautiful image because it brings to mind of seeing mothers and babies, the mum holding the baby just gazing adoringly up at mum. And there is this chemistry. It's wonderful. And the image that you've just painted of lying in the road, gazing lovingly into each other's eyes, the hedgehog and you, it's a beautiful thing. So can I just ask you about the hedgehog being a predator species? Because you've just painted this lovely picture of this little animal that has no flight or flight, very trusting, but it's a predator. How can that be?
Well, it's a predator. You ask a worm. They're carnivorous and so therefore have to work for their food. You just have to remember that life on Earth is a very, very varied thing. And yes, this magnificent predator will chase after chicks, pick up chicks on nests. They will eat eggs. They will eat worms and slugs and caterpillars and all sorts of beetles. They're definitely a predator. But it's just, for me, it's just the idea that they've got a level of capacity. So a lot of small things. You pick up a snail, you have a look at it. There's not a lot of character there. I don't want to be disrespecting the gastropoda, but there isn't a great deal of character within a snail. Even within the mice, shrews, voles that I've studied in the past. Hedgehogs have got character. They've got that level of capacity to be able to share that. They are different. When you've met many hedgehogs, you'll notice that they are all very different in nature. In fact, there is work being done now, basically looking towards shy and boldness. And there's some very interesting work being done looking at how this affects the capacity of other species as well. So you've got this measure between shyness and boldness, and some animals exhibit one, some animals exhibit another within the same species. Yeah, they've got character. They are entertaining to look at, they're cute to look at as well. But at the heart, it is just to remember what it would be like if you were a worm. Then they're definitely a predator.
I'm now thinking, oh my goodness, where can I find my hedgehog love of my life? Here I am living in suburban Oxford. Where can I find my hedgehog love?
The estate that we live in, Florence Park, has in the past had many more hedgehogs than it has now. But there are hedgehogs being seen very close to where you live. I've seen 3 hedgehogs. Well, 2023, I saw 3 hedgehogs, which is the most I've seen for probably a decade in Florence Park. One courting pair on Lytton Road and one just down the end of our road. So we have a slight problem with our estate. It's actually quite a small patch of land, bounded by a canalised ditch, bounded by busy roads. And so whilst it is in itself a really lovely environment for hedgehogs, there's a lot of people with holes in their fences. There's a park behind me, and the fences backing onto the park are wide enough to let hedgehogs into the park. The area is too small to support a viable population. We've done minimum viable population analysis. We know what hedgehogs need. They need 90 hectares and 30 odd hedgehogs to begin with for a viable population. And we don't have that sort of scale here. We also have the city farm around there. They've got badgers. There's the old people's home. And badgers and hedgehogs, both fantastic, gorgeous creatures. I'm planning on getting a badger to accompany my hedgehog. Badgers will eat hedgehogs, and badgers create a landscape of fear, which pushes hedgehogs away.
So for our listeners who may be further afield from Oxford and Florence Park, some of them may live in a sort of inner city situation, or they may be in other suburbias. What advice might you have for them in terms of if they want to start encouraging hedgehogs to come in, lure them into their love nest of their garden? What would you recommend?
Okay, luring hedgehogs, very, very good idea. So there's one of the campaigns I'm involved with. I have got a sort of vaguely official position as the spokesperson for the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. And with that, I work with the Hedgehog Street campaign, which is a partnership with the People's Trust for Endangered Species. And actually, if you look for the Hedgehog Street campaign, there's a whole bunch of resources there which will give you a really key guide. Principal amongst which is a thing called the Big Hedgehog Map. It's a website, you put in your postcode, and from that you will see whether other people have been seeing hedgehogs near where you are. And that's important because if you are living in a metaphorical island, surrounded by a canal and a motorway and an industrial estate, there may simply be no way for the hedgehogs to get into your island. Whereas if you see that people have been seeing hedgehogs near you, then that's an incentive to go, okay, we could start to do this. Now, one of the obstacles that hedgehogs face is an inability to fly, which means that they are obstructed by the barriers we put up between our gardens. So if you're seeing hedgehogs in your neighborhood, but you see none in your gardens, have a look at your garden. Get down on your hands and knees, snuffle around the edges, pretend to be a hedgehog. Are there any holes? They only need to be the size of a CD case, 13 centimeters across, bottom of the fence, and that will open it up. But you talk to your neighbor first, obviously. Get your neighbors to talk to their neighbor and get their neighbors to talk to their neighbor, and you spread hedgehog love down the hedgehog street. And if you're lucky, you end up with a hedgehog street party with hedgehog cake. Hedgehog cake being an important, integral part of my life.
Oh, wonderful. Now, we humans are sort of acquisitive, aren't we? We want to own things. So we have pets, we have hamsters, we have guinea pigs, dogs, cats, and so on. Could I, being impatient for my hedgehog love luring abilities, might I go on a hedgehog dating app and shop for one from an online retailer and essentially, buy a hedgehog as a pet? Is that a good idea?
Okay, so you're looking for prickly Tinder. There probably is a market out there for something like that. Actually, if there are no hedgehogs where you are, there may be a very good reason for that. And therefore, if you bring hedgehogs into that area, you may just be feeding a sinkhole. Yes, it's a lovely thought that you could be repopulating areas, and sometimes that's a great idea. So on the one hand, yes, I mean, you're right about the acquisitive nature of it. People want the hedgehog to be there for them, and they get very upset that the hedgehog actually is quite fickle and will be disappearing off. Maybe they have to accept it's going to be more like Grindr than Tinder. But anyway, you probably need to edit that bit out. But the hedgehog's
it's got a good bit. I'm going to leave it in.
But that's the point. You can bring your hedgehog to you, but there's no guarantee they'll stay. Hedgehog rescues, of which there are probably at least 800 around the country. Rehabilitators, people want to help hedgehogs. They're looking for ways of doing it. And yes, you can do the stuff in your garden. You can do the stuff lobbying your local council to manage your park or your playing fields better. You can join in with a hedgehog-friendly campus and get universities and schools to... All of these things you can do. But actually, people want hands-on. Now, most wildlife, as we've already explored this idea that most wildlife has a fight or flight response. So most wildlife, if you get too close to it, if you try and pick it up, will react either through fear or through sort of fight. And neither of which are good things if you're trying to handle wildlife. Yes, there are wildlife hospitals. There's Vale Wildlife Rescue over in Cirencester Way. Amazing people who take in all sorts of wildlife. But they're highly trained. They know how to do it without engendering too much terror. Because the hedgehog doesn't exhibit these senses of fear, etc., they are easier to handle. So it means that people want to help hedgehogs. They're in distress. They find juvenile hedgehogs out in the winter that are going to die because they're not fat enough to survive hibernation. They find injured hedgehogs, etc. They'll bring them in, and the hedgehogs allow themselves to be rehabilitated. That doesn't mean it's a no-cost exercise. Research has shown they do have elevated cortisol levels when they're kept in captivity, but it is held against the inevitable deaths caught in netting or whatever. So there are rescues who then need to release hedgehogs back into the wild. Now, the best advice is to release hedgehogs as near as possible to where they were found. But sometimes that's just not possible because of a badger set, busy roads, a canal, something like that. So yes, it's not quite a dating app, but you find your local hedgehog rescue and you get in touch with them. And often they will then come and do a survey or get you at least to fill in a form to describe what you've got in your garden, to describe whether you have an ornamental pond, which is a disaster for hedgehogs, whereas a wildlife pond is brilliant. Whether you have open drains which allow hedgehogs to get trapped, whether you use lots of poison in your gardens, or whether you are a some nature-friendly gardener with a compost heap and a log pile and a good patch of brambles.
So now we spent quite a lot of time talking about cute hedgehogs, which are easy to love, as we've just seen. But what about insects and other creepy crawlies? I've written on the MetroWild blog about the fireflies, which were in the garden, in my parents' garden in Malaysia when I was a child. And they're beautiful. But what about these other insects that are not so lovely, and they sting and they bite and they get everywhere into our jam sandwiches in the summer when we're on a picnic and all that kind of stuff? But insects, of course, are also important to the planet. How can we love these not so cute creatures? And I suppose I would expand it beyond insects to things that are not so cute.
Well, the not so cute, it's important to recognize it. Not everybody has a passion for these things, and it can depend on circumstance as well. I will tolerate a wasp as it buzzes around me, but if I'm in a car and a wasp flies in, I get more bothered by it. But also my wife actually has an anaphylactic reaction to wasp stings. So, so I have some things I will kill. Wasps in the house I tend to treat fairly mercilessly because they engender such fear in Zoe. For me, it's to do with systems. It's not to do with individuals. I dare I say it. I love hedgehogs, but hedgehogs, it doesn't matter. Actually, it could be anything, because what I'm after is an ecosystem which is functioning, an ecosystem which is not being degraded. And so, as part of that ecosystem, we will want a hedgehog. The only way to have a hedgehog in that ecosystem is to have a bunch of things for hedgehogs to eat. And as they're principally insectivores, they need to have that invertebrate, that macroinvertebrate food base. If we don't have it there, we get no hedgehogs. So it's absolutely, that's the fundamental line for me. It doesn't matter how cute or otherwise they are, how bothersome or otherwise they are. Without them, we don't get hedgehogs. It's as simple as that.
So actually, it's worth just stepping back, because we've gone into the detail of the hedgehog as an individual, shy and bold and have characters. But you began our conversation talking about a way into loving nature and protecting nature. So what you're saying, therefore, is actually that hedgehog doesn't exist on its own. You can't, have a little hedgehog and feed it breadcrumbs and things like that just to keep it going. What you're saying is that the hedgehog is part of a larger ecosystem involving insects and other creatures. So now, I'm an English grad. I kind of understand what an ecosystem is, but I think it would be really helpful, because you're my first nature expert on MetroWild, to tell us what is an ecosystem, how does it work, and how do we as humans, and in particular our cities, also fit into ecosystems?
Okay, I'm going to take a step even further back than that. Let's go back to the ancient Greek and the word oikos. Oikos, which means home, essentially. And there are two enormous words in the English language, economy and ecology. And one of them is treated as the absolute pinnacle of human endeavor, economy, and the other is largely disregarded, ecology. Now, economy is based, the word essentially means is the management of the home. Ecology is the study of the home. And I would suggest it's a particular sort of madness to manage what you have not studied. So the idea that it's the economy stupid or whatever is utterly nuts. It's the economy is just one small subset of a healthy ecosystem. So without the big thing, the healthy ecosystem around us, the economy disappears. Our health services disappear, schooling disappears, education, all of these things vanish. None of it can operate without a healthy ecosystem. I think probably I'll get to the question in a minute, but a really good starting point is Kate Raworth's fascinating book, Donut Economics, because in that she looks at planetary boundaries and she looks at the minimum requirements people need for a healthy life. And basically you can create that into one of those bagel-shaped donut, not one of the jam-filled donuts, because that doesn't work so well for the analogy. But yeah, basically you've got to keep within the body of the donut. You exceed beyond that, and we've got climate change, we've got eutrophication of the water, we've got destruction of rainforest, and we have to meet the needs of the people so that we're not dropping into the middle of not getting enough food, not getting education, loss of women's rights, etc. All of these things. So that's a good starting point. Now, so an ecosystem is basically the way our home, the planet, there is no planet B. We have this, our home, and to have the home working, we need a system whereby all of the various bits connect up. Every single thing connects up. So the quality of stone underneath the mud in my garden affects the mud in my garden, the soil in my garden. The soil in my garden affects the plants that grow, which affects the insects which come to my garden, which affects the bats which feed on the insects, which affect the hedgehogs which feed on the insects. So all of these things are connected. And brilliantly, Merlin Sheldrake has been diving into the wood wide web and the connectivity between trees. I wrote about this 20 odd years ago, looking at the problem humanity has with discretism. We tend to be looking at a human being is here, a hedgehog is here, a tree is there. But actually, the fact that there is this connectivity, there is this web between these things, that is the system we need to protect. If we dive into human exceptionalism, if we believe that we are special, if we believe that we are better than, and we separate ourselves off from nature and from the ecosystem on which we depend, then we get into the situation we are in now, one in which ecosystem degradation is the absolute, it's the heart of what we do. Where we go, we destroy. Where we go, we alter, we change, we pour nutrients, eutrophication of waterways, sewage in rivers, climate change, loss of species, acidification of the oceans, you name it, we carry on. So the issue is we are part of a system. The problem is we think, or many of us think, we are exceptional and are removed from that system and we can solve the problems. We can't, because without the ecosystem functioning, we are lost.
That is quite a huge, dark, overwhelming image of how, I guess, one thing that starts to fall away from the ecosystem then starts to affect something else, and it all starts to unravel unless we catch it and allow it to reset or help it to reset. And one of the themes of MetroWild is loving nature, but I'm a city dweller. I love the city. And picking up from what you quoted from Stephen Gould is that we can love both. And if I want my lovely city lifestyle to continue and offer me a healthy, good life and future generations to come, for them to have a healthy, good life, and then we need to think about ourselves and our cities as part of this larger ecosystem, and the relationship between nature and cities, it's really integral. We can forget living in our cities with the tarmac and the big buildings and air conditioning and all that, we'll be fine. We're in the city, we can go to the shop and get food. But of course, if things start to degrade in this huge system, supply chains will fall apart. Things like tarmac and concrete, all these things are made from the natural world, from natural resources. You don't have to look at all the scars of quarrying and so on. And is it the photographer Sebastian Salgado? He's done some amazing work taking photographs of mines in South America where people are mining for silicon and all these things for all our technology and machinery. And it's so important to bear that in mind and to be aware of that all, because if we love the life that we have, even if, you're not an animal lover, even if you don't love hedgehogs, if you love the life that you have, then we need to collectively engage in the current unraveling of our planetary ecosystem.
Well, if you look at a city is actually quite a good place to keep people. A rural lifestyle is an idyllic dream. But if you're doing that, you are bound largely to a car or to isolation, simply because there isn't the infrastructure. I have to say I have a great fondness for the idea of being able to walk or cycle to doctors, dentists, post office and shops and farmers markets. That seems like actually a pretty idyllic lifestyle for me. I have friends who live out in the Somerset countryside, in a house they built on a field, and the only place they can walk to and buy food is an artisanal cheese place. Yeah, that's it. So there is a very good reason to bring us all into one place. But we are, as you describe, very vulnerable. I can't remember the figure. Is it 6 meals? Is it 6 meals or 9 meals away from a riot in terms of the systems? Because that's why I talk about the systems. The system which provides food, brings food into a city. That breaks down, and very, very quickly, there is no food in a city. You can get deeply apocalyptic about these things. And this is about the wider ecosystem. And if that system is not functioning, if we are getting inundations, if we're getting droughts, if we're getting heat waves, if we're getting any of these natural phenomena happening, we end up losing that connectivity with a sort of robustly healthy system. We have called the thing that we live in, the geological epoch we live in, is known as the Holocene. It's the calm thing. It's the calmest it's possibly ever been, the Holocene, which has allowed agriculture and civilization to develop. Now, there are some who argue that civilization is not necessarily such a great thing. However, I will respond to that by pointing out without civilization, we don't get a symphony orchestra, and I kind of like those. So we have this brief moment in geological time when the situation has been calm enough to allow intelligent life to evolve. But it's now recognized that we have slipped out of the Holocene into the Anthropocene, into the man-made era. I wrote something a few years ago looking at how an archaeologist in a million years' time coming back down here will be sifting through the layers, and they'll get to this layer of strange radionuclides, chicken bones and bits of plastic, and go, what happened here? Where did they go? This is the mark we're leaving on the planet. And that will be the bit they go, yeah, that was the Anthropocene. Hopefully we can see some sense and go back towards looking at nature as something we are part of and need to be nurtured with. Because without that, so we're going back into that dark place again, aren't we? You're trying to get me to lift things, I could tell. And all I'm doing is driving us back down into the doom and the gloom, the sort of Stygian recesses of the sad parts of my brain. But if we don't feel that fear, we don't act. But we have to act with love. We have to actually have that stimulus to try and be committed to it. I go back to the hedgehog. Yeah, you find that moment of connection. Now, it might not be a hedgehog. It might be, I know, I have a robin, which over the years, I have a number of robins I've managed to tame to land on my hand and take food from my hand. I have had wildlife experiences with these robins in my garden, which in fact, exceed, the safaris in East Africa or nights out with hedgehogs. It doesn't have to be a hedgehog. You will find your thing. You'll find that moment of connection. And that's where great changes come.
So how can we all do our bit? So I am trying to lift it, drag you along if I have.
Sorry.
What can we all do to do our bit to maintain a healthy ecosystem? Do we, in the context of our conversation, do we just pull the duvet over our heads and, okay, it's Armageddon, it's all hopeless? But is there actually something we can do as individuals or at a wider level, as businesses, as a nation, as a world?
I mean, it's tricky. I'm doing a lecture this evening, or talk, to a gardening club in Buckinghamshire. And often at these talks, people say, why do you keep going on about hedgehogs? And I point out the most important creature on the planet and their power to make people fall in love with nature. But also what I point out is that I will go, I'm invited to this gardening club or to that Women's Institute group or to whoever it is. And they're never going to invite me in to discuss macroinvertebrate decline or the transport infrastructure or agricultural policy or the necessity of maybe changing our diet so it's more plants and less animals, or the National Planning Policy Framework, which is a really tedious document, or even the necessity of dismantling industrial capitalism and replacing it with something nicer. They're never going to invite me in to do that. But what I've developed is a very cunning Trojan hedgehog. And I've shuffled my way in there. Then we talk about hedgehogs, but actually we're talking about all of these things. So what can we do? There are different levels of this. Personally, I think we need to take responsibility for the impact we have on our wider ecosystem. And so I stopped eating meat nearly 40 years ago. I have certainly in the last 20 years, very, very rarely flown. It's an absolute minimum. I try and maintain a sort of conscious awareness of my patterns of consumption. That's something we can do. And that's insular. It's you on your own. But you do that, but you share it. You share it in ways which are non-confrontational. You share it for me, I do it through humor. I will make people laugh tonight about the necessity of dismantling industrial capitalism. Yeah, that's not kind of what they were expecting to be having a talk about, but they will find that bit funny. So we can begin to find our ways of doing it. It may be that you will just want to talk to your neighbors about what you're doing, sharing what it is. You may just want to get, for me, one of my great delights is going into primary schools and just scattering seeds and just going, okay, some of these kids are going to come away. And I know they do because I've met their parents in the park. I've come away going, yeah, wow, they are now absolutely fascinated. They really want us to do this in our garden, create a wildlife pond. They really want us to have a log pile because of what they know now about nature. So Sharing. So don't just keep it all to yourself. Don't put your head under a duvet unless it's really cold. But look outwards, share, talk to your neighbors if you can. And it's a case of just spending time working out what you can do, because you have control of yourself. You can have some degree of influence over your closer people with closer circles around you. And you're just going to reach out. There is no silver bullet. There is no, everybody go vegan today because it's going to save hedgehogs. That's just not going to be the case. But if everybody ate less meat, then that would have a massive impact, because less of our farmland would be put over to producing feed for livestock, and could be put aside for nature. The maths has been done. It's totally doable. And yes, we're not all going to stop driving overnight, but the fewer of us drive, the better. And the more of us that drive more slowly, the better. Personal things are good. And then you take the next step and go, okay, how do we spread that word? Yes, talking to neighbors is great, but maybe sometimes you need to sit in front of a bulldozer or smash some stuff up. There is a trajectory, and non-violent direct action is at the heart of revolutionary change, societal change. It always has been, it always will be. So talk to your neighbors first, but consider sometimes you might need to dismantle a pipeline.
So that's really interesting, because I've been reflecting as you were speaking about, so what am I doing? It's all very well my asking my guests, what do you do? So I have to say, I love a good steak, and I love my beef curry, and I love chicken curry and so on, being from Malaysia. But I have reduced my meat consumption. I have one main meal, which is lunch, which has usually fish or meat. And then in the evening, I have vegetarian beans. It's beans and vegetables or soup. And I feel healthier for it. I'm not putting on so much weight, which one has to be aware of as one gets older. And also then you're not going to bed with a big, heavy stomach. And the other thing I have a car, but I've also got a bicycle, and I love walking, because actually walking around our local neighborhood on my way to the shops, I bump into people, we have a chat, and then I feel, this is a really wonderful community. And this is, in fact, how I think you and I met. We were walking down the road, and we were just chatting, because I think you were outside stacking something, and we just started chatting. And so this is such a wonderful thing. And when I moved to Oxford, my house had 2 parking spaces in the front garden. And I thought, well, I don't actually need 2 parking spaces. So I dug up, very difficult to get the gravel off this bit. And I was hoping to be able to plant the shrubs and all that, but actually there was all debris and builder's debris underneath. So I built in a raised bed and put lots of soil. And now I do have a shrubbery type of front garden, which has softened the whole thing. And now, we see the bees and the butterflies and all that in the front garden.
Okay, so I would just add, you've got shrubs in your front garden. That's fantastic. Put food there. Grow food there. There was a lovely moment. Our next door neighbors had taken down the wall and they planted raspberry canes. And it was just one of the most delightful things of watching the kids come along when the raspberries were in fruit. And there was a sign put up saying, help yourself. We've also got our local giving book library. We put excess books that we don't need anymore in there, and they go. And it's a wonderful thing. You just take what you want. You talked earlier about the acquisitive nature of us, especially with regards to trying to sort of get wildlife to us. I think the Buddhists are quite good at losing attachment, getting rid of this. So you have psychological attachment, you have emotional attachment and physical attachment. If we can begin to shed that level of attachment, if we can open ourselves up to the idea, yes, there may be some people in the community who may take advantage of these things, but actually most don't. Most people are good. Most people are good. If they're given the resources, the access, they will do good things. And so you present them with good things, you present them with books to take, you present them with fruit to take. This is how you build strength within community. When everything goes bad, as it probably will at some point, you can be holed up in a bunker somewhere with an army defending you, or you can be within a community of people who'd make the best of it. I know where I'd rather be.
And actually, with our little area, there's a WhatsApp group, and often people are saying, I bought this spare box of chocolate or whatever. Anybody want it? Or I've just been clearing my loft, and here's a whole load of puzzles. Anybody want it? And we're sharing and I guess recycling, and that's part of a little mini circular economy because it's not going to waste.
And going back to donut economics as well. Yeah, get things reused, get things moving around. And I look with a dreamy heart towards a more community-based environment, because that is how ecosystems work. And that's what we need to remember. We are part of an ecosystem. We're part of a financial ecosystem. We're part of a health ecosystem. We're part of an educational ecosystem, a transport ecosystem. And we need to be willing to share. And it just seems so blindingly obvious that if we're going to have any hope of getting through difficult times, insularity and accumulation, acquisition and hoarding are the essence of disaster. And the opening out, the sharing is the way forward.
That is a wonderfully powerful message to end on. Hugh Warwick, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
You can find credits, photos and links to some of the things we talked about on the show notes page. Go to metrowild.co.uk and search for Hugh Warwick. The views expressed by my guests are entirely their own and do not necessarily reflect my views. This podcast is part of the larger MetroWild magazine-style blog. Go to metrowild.co.uk to have a look at the range of articles featured there, all about city life and wild nature. This was the first interview on the MetroWild podcast, and other episodes are coming soon. For those of you who prefer to listen to podcasts rather than sit down with written text, I will also be offering selected articles from the blog as audio episodes here on this podcast. I hope you will follow or subscribe to the MetroWild podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify and Audible. It's free. New episodes will then appear in your pod listening app as soon as I release them into the wild. A handy link to find the podcast is podfollow.com/MetroWild. The link to the full MetroWild multimedia magazine again is metrowild.co.uk. You can also like or follow the MetroWild Facebook page at facebook.com/MetroWildUK. I'm Yang-May Ooi. You can find me on social media as @TigerSpiritUK. That podfollow link again for this podcast is podfollow.com/MetroWild. Thank you for listening and see you again soon.